Mm-hmm. Let's see if I turn the lights on. Hold on. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, put something in chat. Just want to make sure my microphone is working fine. Hey, good morning. Can you hear me? Awesome. All right. I know it doesn't start till 1. I just want to make sure my audio works because I've never used YouTube Live. Until 1 o'clock, you can just stare at the creations that my daughter has behind me and all the other weird stuff in my office. Nice. My daughter is 9. I have a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old. And so if you hear a random outburst of anger, that would be my 15-year-old playing his video games in the living room. Hopefully everyone is having a good Sunday so far. I'm on East Coast time, so right now it's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I had to move my time because I have a family function to attend. So I had to move the time up, and it was not in one of my 13 calendars. So there are so many messages in Slack to shift through. All right, let's see. Almost at one. Hey, Micah. All right, it's 1 o'clock. Bus doesn't wait for everybody. So, hi, my name is Tim Wong. I am happy to be conducting this webinar. And as people trickle in, I guess I'll start first. Hold on. Okay, so my name is Tim Wong. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, United States. I'm on East Coast time, so it's about 1 o'clock. Just to give you a little bit about my background and what this webinar is going to be on. It's kind of going to be more of a Q&A, so if you have any questions, put them either in the chat or the Study Jam channel in Slack. So a little bit of background on me. I was born and raised in the United States, in New Jersey, actually. My family, I'm a first generation Chinese. My parents immigrated from China here, and so I'm pretty much American. Lived here my whole life. I went to university in Rutgers in New Jersey and graduated with a degree in computer science in 2000. So, and then I got my job as a software engineer. Most of my experience has been doing software development. Specifically, I guess you could call it full stack. I don't think there's any true full stack software developers out there. But I work on front end and back end. I prefer mostly back end because I think that's where my strong suit is. But I do have quite a few people I work with that are really good at doing front end development. So I've been doing software development for about 20 years. And in about, I want to say, let's see, for about 6 years ago, I'd worked for a small startup, or pretty much like a startup. The company is called Property Room. And at that time, we had most of our software applications hosted in a traditional hosting center. Like we would have our systems administrator go in, um, collect the tape backups. Yeah, I've been doing software development for a while. So yeah, I'm 41. And so he would go in on a weekly basis in California, go into the data center and swap out the tape backups. And the problem we were running to the time is what Property Room is. It's like eBay, but for police confiscated items that the person who went to jail basically didn't pick up their items. So after a certain amount of time, they are property of the state and the police, and so they have to get rid of a lot of the surplus. So we have this website that is like eBay, um, and so it's a web application with a database. It was a Microsoft stack, and we were hosting everything in a traditional data center. And then my boss basically said, "This is costing too much. We need to save money." Looked at our options. At the time, it was really mainly Azure and AWS. And so he really liked AWS. It allowed us to control what was going on more so than the data center. So we finally kind of sucked it up. And it was myself and my boss and one other person. We probably transitioned in about 3 months from the data center and shifting all of our VMs to AWS. And so it was a really, really good learning experience. It was a little bit stressful is probably understating it. But I gained a lot of experience in that 2 year period of time. So fast forward today, I work at a company called Relias. They're in the healthcare space in the United States. We're also located in Germany and China and the UK. Um, we have a lot of different products. The product that I work on is the learning platform, which is so nurses and doctors can take uh, their training online to get the credits they need to maintain like their nursing certifications. But they're, you know, we that's primarily what I work on, and how this all fits in as a software developer, especially if you're someone who works full stack and has been in the industry as long as I have. Um, you can't just get stuck and focusing in on working on just software development. You to be a better asset, you kind of have to know a little bit more out of your comfort zone. So I've worn a lot of hats over the years, and so I work primarily in the Azure platform. So there's pretty much analogous services that Azure provides that AWS also provides for the most part. So we actually have a systems administration and DevOps team, and their primary responsibility is to, yes, set up the infrastructure and architecture so we can, as software developers, just push our code out. Um, so I've someone that releases the code. We kind of have a process that we're changing to, but we do a lot of continuous integration. We have continuous deployments for our development environment. So what that means is, like, I know we're learning GitHub or Git in this scholarship right now, but what happens is we've set up things in Azure where it continuously integrates. Anytime I merge a pull request for a new feature or a bug that I'm fixing, it something gets triggered, it pulls that code and it deploys it out to the server automatically. So if you're not familiar with continuous integration or deployments, Azure has something called pipelines. I'm not ultimately familiar with what AWS has, but if you're familiar with software like Bamboo or Jenkins, those are applications. Their purpose is to do continuous integration, taking their code and pushing it out. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, kind of my experience with DevOps, as far as pushing it out. Code pipeline, thank you. Like I said, I started in AWS, but it's grown such a large amount. And even at the time when I was in AWS, we did not do CI/CD stuff. It was manually building your code, copying and FTPing it to like multiple web servers. So we were in the very infancy of getting into the cloud and kind of utilizing the cloud for what we wanted to. So we do use a lot of services, like queuing services and topic subscription models, when we have a lot of things that we want to do asynchronously that don't need to be instantaneously done. Um, Trying to think what else. We do use the equivalent of AWS RDS. We use Azure Functions, the equivalent be AWS Lambda functions. So we're utilizing a lot of what the cloud has to offer. So anyway, I'm going to open up to kind of some questions you have, and I'll look at the Slack channel and the live chat, and I'll see if I can answer anything. Hmm. With your experience with Azure, so the question is, with your experience with Azure and AWS, which do you think would be more useful for smaller organizations? Oh, that's a good one. I think it really is what you are more comfortable in. I work in the Microsoft stack space, so I think that Azure probably caters to, um, if you work with C sharp, or SQL Server. I think it because it's Microsoft, they cater to that, to their technologies. So I had a conversation with one of my system administrators who's also in this scholarship, um, and the one thing that I like about Azure that I don't like about AWS, and maybe it's just because I'm not familiar with AWS, is the fact that when I want to delete something, like I deploy a whole bunch of different things, we deploy them in something what we call a resource group. And it's almost like if you think about Windows, you have a folder to hold files. Well, a resource group is a folder that you associate every Azure service you deploy to. If I want to delete all the things I just deployed, I can just delete the resource group and it will wipe out all the resources that are associated with that resource group. I don't think AWS has anything like that. And I know one of the common problems with the scholarship is like people are like creating VPCs and EC2s and all this other stuff, and they forget where the stuff is. And so I think there's a way, there's a specific screen where you can list all the resources, but it's not really intuitive. And it's much more intuitive in Azure. Also, if you have an MSDN license, which my company provides for us, I have a professional MSDN license. They give you $50 of Azure credits a month for free. So if I want to try something, I'm doing a proof of concept on building a feature out for the application I'm working on. But I want to try out like um, queue services or Azure Functions. I have $50 to burn every month, so I don't have to worry as much with AWS. And like if I do something, it's going to cost me. I can do that with Azure in my own little playground. I would assume that if you're with a small company and you have AWS, you can probably like put it on the company credit card. That's what I would assume. So it might not be as big of a deal. Um, but I think it's really personal preference. I think they're both very comparable. And it's really what you want to use. Let's see. Cloud formation stack might be the same. Yeah, that is similar. So that's a good point too. Let's see. I'd love to know what cloud DevOps really entails, like an in-depth overview. Is it CI/CD pipelines and the likes? Just elaborate. So I would say yes, it's all of the above. So I would say um, my weakest part in the cloud space is I am not a network architecture guy. I am a developer. So I that stuff is usually set up because when you join a company and you're working with a company, unless it's like a startup and you're starting from scratch, all the infrastructure is already set up for you by a system administrator or your predecessors at the company. So most of the time, I don't have to worry about that. All that networking stuff is set up. So I would say most of DevOps, and I can tell you from my experience working at Relias, is really CI/CD, um, setting up your repos, setting up the in Azure it's pipelines, but setting up your pipelines to know which repository it points to, and knowing when to trigger the builds, and then how to funnel the what we call artifacts, like all the stuff that gets generated once you build your application, and how does that funnel that to either the EC2 virtual machine, or in Azure it's your Azure VM, or um, your Beanstalk. In Azure it's called an app service. How do you funnel those things over? Also, for us, because we have different environments. We have an environment we deploy to for internal testing. We have a development environment we deploy to for the code that we're about to release to production. And then we have our code that gets released to production. That's a lot of the DevOps involved. But also, I think one thing that's really hard is working with the cloud. It's like a kid in a candy shop. There are just so many things out there. You have AWS has Redshift. You've got stuff for SQL, stuff for NoSQL, stuff for data analysis, stuff for reporting, stuff for machine learning, so there's like so much stuff, and people are like, well, I got to learn everything. No, you don't. Just learn and be knowledgeable, and then when you have to start working on something, then you can go, okay, let me deep dive into this service or this, this offering and see how do I do it. And then write some code that interfaces with that service and see how it works. So I would say most of us who are like in management, you'll go to seminars, you'll go to conferences, you'll get the very high level of what a service does. And then when it comes time to, like, you get a business case for doing something, let's say like video processing. Oh, well, maybe I want to use this, this, and this, and then you learn more about it. Um, let's see, and yes, it is resource. Let's see if anyone's entered anything not there. Okay. Yeah, it really is. And let me tell you, when I started, uh, it's weird at work because I feel I'm only 41 and I'm not really that old, but I feel like the old guy at work because when I talk about things like pop culture references, no one knows what I'm talking about. Uh, but 20 years ago, we didn't have cloud. We had a very small amount of tools to do the work. So, like back then, I had VB6. That was what we used to develop our Windows desktop applications. And we had Alta Vista. We didn't have Google, and we had to read books to learn these things. And that was it. So it's not like I had 20 other things to learn. And so a lot of people have what they call imposter syndrome, which is you feel so unconfident about what you do. And it's a very normal thing. I mean, I experienced imposter syndrome as a software developer because there's just so much stuff out there to use and it's very overwhelming. And you just have to, like, my mindset is, even though I've been doing this for a while, because of how technology is, you're never an expert at something usually. And that's fine because I think this is one of the few industries where you are constantly learning and improving. And that's a good thing. It's not like you're a mechanic, and not to diss mechanics. I think they do an awesome job, but I can understand how repetition and doing the same thing over and over and over again can be kind of detrimental to you having longevity in that industry. Tech is something that has a very different problem, um, but you have a lot of room to grow. Let's see, any other questions? Uh, what challenges have you faced through your DevOps cloud experience, and how do you approach the challenges? Okay. So I'm going to go back to my time at Property Room. Like I said, it was only 3 developers. We had no experience at all with the cloud. I didn't even know what a VM was until we started working with AWS. And I would say, I felt like I was a pretty good developer. I knew how, if I had a problem, how to write the code to solve the problem. Um, but the one thing I said, like how I approached it, was I had a really good boss. I had a really good person who had worked with people before. It basically said, I expect you to struggle. I expect you to have problems, and I expect you to learn by struggling. Um, there, even though this was 6, 7 years ago, we still had Google. One of the resources that I use a lot of the times is the documentation from either AWS or Azure. And many of these companies, even GCP, are going to put things out on GitHub as coding samples on how do I, this is an example of how to use SQS or SNS from a coding perspective. And that makes it easier. So there's lots of resources on GitHub to share code if you're a developer on how to use that. Stack Overflow is fantastic. Chances are, if you have a problem, someone else or 10, 20 other people have had that same problem as you have asked that question on Stack Overflow. And one thing I like to do in Slack for this scholarship is If someone asks a question and I'm not really great at explaining it, or it's really hard to explain through written word, is just link a YouTube video. There are tons of people out there that are doing how to's and tutorials on using a service and how it works and explaining it really well. So sometimes they're like hour videos from seminars or conferences. So those are probably ones I really wouldn't want to share because most of us don't have, I know I don't have that attention span to watch an hour video. What you could do is link, when you share a YouTube video, there is a way to link a timestamp in the video to get to, like, if you have an hour video, maybe they start talking about what you're trying to answer in like the 30-minute mark. But I'm a visual learner. I like to watch videos. It helps. Our company allows us to have a couple of Pluralsight subscriptions. Pluralsight is another resource. It is a paid resource though. Um, CBT Nuggets is something that we used. C as in C as in Charlie, B as in Beta, T as in Tim. CBT Nuggets. That my last company, we got CBT Nuggets videos to pass our AWS exams. So yeah, just take it one step at a time, and know you should know when to struggle, but don't struggle for too long. Does your company accept interns? Where would you recommend we look for remote gigs for Udacity student? That is a really good question. Our company does accept interns. We're based out of Cary, North Carolina. And just in case you didn't know, the reason why I was able to get into the scholarship is our parent company is Bertelsmann, which I believe is also the parent company of Udacity. So last year I actually took part in a scholarship for data science too. But we do accept interns. They're typically, it has to be in office for our office. So if you are someone who is not based out of North Carolina, I do know there is a department in Germany, China, Canada, and England. I don't know where exactly, but if you go to relias.com, you can find out more about the company. Where would you recommend looking for remote gigs? That is a good question, and I'm not sure to answer that. I do know that with the way that things have shifted over my time as a developer, um, we're much more of a what's the word I'm looking for? In the IT industry, there you're going to have a lot of distributed teams. You're going to have teams. Microsoft does this a lot. A lot of the big companies, because they're all over the place. You're going to have teams based out of India. You have teams based out of China. Teams. So you might have a lot of online collaboration tools, and that's more common than it was 10, 20 years ago. My recommendation is beef up your LinkedIn profile, at least if you're in the US. I don't know how popular LinkedIn is elsewhere, but if it is, use it. It's basically an online resume for you. And I can tell you probably I get on average 1 to 2 requests for, are you interested in this job, a week. So I say, no, I'm very happy with my company. Um, but it's always good to kind of have that. So if something happens, you know, I know I have all my resources updated, and if I need to look for a new job, I can. Um, but you'd be surprised how many people can find you on a resource like LinkedIn. I don't know what else is out there that's the equivalent of LinkedIn, but any job hunting site, look for remote. I think remote is a little bit harder. I do think, like, most of the time there are people that can work remote, but you have to prove your worth. You have to prove that you have a history of being able to work remotely. Um, and for me, I prefer not to be remote because I like to have physical, face-to-face conversations with my team. That's just kind of my style. We do work remotely, so we can work 1 time a week from home. But sometimes it's just easier to have a face-to-face conversation. So I don't have a thought on that, but if someone else wants to answer like what to recommend for remote gigs, That's definitely something I would be welcome to people answering. Okay, I think so. We have 6 minutes left, but I think that's all the questions I have from now. So I'll just keep. Oh, got another question. AWS CLI or Amazon console is mostly preferred by companies. It depends on who you are. If I'm like the CEO, I really don't care. I just want you to get it done. I think CLI is quicker. It is a pain in the butt to learn if you're not really command line friendly. And I think most people are in one of two boats. You're either like, I love the console or I love the command line. Um, like Git is a perfect example. Like I do get command lines to commit, to push, to create branches, to merge, but I cheat a lot and I use Visual Studio. It has built-in stuff to do all the things I can do. So there's a lot of things that the tools like SourceTree, Git Kraken that you can use that will do a bunch of command line commands all in one for you. So there are simple things that I will do with the CLI, and there are simple things that I will do with a tool. Um, I do think using you should know the CLI and be comfortable. It's kind of like one of the questions before. You don't have to know everything, but know what you need to do, get good with that, and then once you need to do work with some other service with AWS, then learn the CLI and the options that are specific to the task that you're working on there. And that's kind of how you grow, just a little bit each time. You don't have to learn everything all at once. That's unless you have a photographic memory. That's super, super hard to do. I've heard you speaking about certifications. Which cloud or DevOps certification do you have or suggest people should have? Okay. So this may be an unpopular opinion. Um, I don't care what certification you have. So I say that as a senior developer at my company in the United States, and that's my point of view and my perspective. So it may not be true for other people. It's nice to have on your resume. It's good for you as a person to get those certifications to be more knowledgeable. But here's the thing, there are a lot of certifications, especially the entry level ones, that test your surface level knowledge of their product. It doesn't mean you're actually any good at using that product. You just know how to answer the questions for the test. So if you have a certification on your resume, it just makes me as a someone who's interviewing you know that, hey, it's fair game to answer those questions for what he got certification on. But you really do need some real world experience. So certification is kind of like a cherry on top of your ice cream. It's nice to have, but I really want someone, when I look to interview them, someone who has good communication skills. I understand their thinking process. So if I ask a question, I don't care if you know the answer or not necessarily, but I want you to be like, if you don't know the answer, to ask me a proper question to get clarification so you can try to better answer the question. So I would say if you have a certification, because I've taken certifications, I've gotten them, but I feel like after I've taken some Microsoft certifications and AWS certifications, it's made me more generally knowledgeable, but for the position I'm applying for, it may not necessarily make me qualified. I recently changed careers to IT, got my CCIE, CCNA. Do you have to be a good experience with coding to be a good DevOps engineer? Okay, so I would say it helps, but it isn't necessary. So our primary DevOps team, they transition, they do systems administration and then do DevOps. They are not coders. We are the coders. And so we work with them. I'm learning about DevOps. So when we run into a problem, we can work together and I have a base level of understanding of how DevOps works. Um, but they are by no means experts in coding. They shouldn't, because in a company like mine where we have um, I want to say between 5 and 10 teams. I apologize because I don't know the exact number. There are so many. There's so much work to build new features and software, they can't know how to do that stuff unless they're doing software development. But if you're doing software development, you're not doing the DevOps necessarily. Um, their focus and concentration is knowing how the services work, making sure things are auto scaled properly, knowing metrics of the system. So if the CPU is being ultra utilized, to make sure to make adjustments in the system that things auto scale properly, um, and how stuff is deployed. So while it does help, it doesn't mean. And when we talk about coding, because I know we have the 60-day challenge, like I think that the word coding is misused there. When I think of coding to a software developer, it means you're doing work in like Java or C Sharp or some programming language. Coding to a DevOps engineer might be I'm working on a YAML file or a JSON file to do cloud formation. I want to be able to know how to code that file. It's really a configuration file. So all of my services get deployed in the way I want it to. I want EC2 instances that are like T2 micro. So I have to know how to specify that in the configuration file. Like to a DevOps engineer, I think that's what they mean by coding. Um, so like, do you have to be good at understanding how YAML files or JSON files to do cloud formation? Yes, you should. But do I need to know how to code business logic in software? Probably not. It might be helpful. It would expand your knowledge, but I wouldn't necessarily like that's required experience to be a DevOps engineer. The other thing maybe would be if you're working with AWS Lambda functions, it might be useful to know like JavaScript or what other programming languages are available for you. But I would not expect the DevOps engineer to have the same level of expertise or knowledge in coding a programming language as a traditional software developer. So I hope that answered your question. All right, so it's 1:31 East Coast time. I'm going to answer this one last question. And then if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to direct message me or talk in the Slack channels. All right, I would appreciate an advice on going multi-cloud or diving into one fully, following AWS for now, planning for Azure, but not focusing on the rest. So yeah, I think this is one thing people will get confused by. They're like, well, we're doing a DevOps course. Does that mean I have to get good at Azure, AWS, GCP, DigitalOcean, Linode, yada, yada, yada? And the answer is no. Um, so if you are like a college level student and you're not working for a company, I say pick one. Pick one and learn the ins and outs, because generally the concepts from one place are going to transfer over to the other place. You just have to learn, for the lack of a better term, the syntax, the naming, marketing terminology. Whoever invented Beanstalk, I mean, I could have thought of a better name than Beanstalk. I understand why they called it Beanstalk, but it kind of makes no sense initially. So get good at one, get good at that. And then like if you get an internship or a job elsewhere and they're not using AWS, you use Azure, then you start learning Azure. Unless you have a lot of free time. I have no free time. I have a full-time job. I have two kids and I have a wife. I have no free time. Then you just get good at wherever you go to. It's really not, I think once you get comfortable with a cloud technology, it's not a terrible big shift in time. And I think if you're joining that company and they're like, we have Azure, but you have AWS, and they're willing to take a risk on you and they understand like you have cloud knowledge. Are you willing to make the shift? I think they would be open to that, unless maybe the other candidates already have Azure experience. So I'd say if you're starting to get into it, pick one. Since you're in the scholarship, AWS is probably a good one to start out with. All right. So that's going to wrap it up. I'm going to leave this. I got to figure out how to keep the stream, and I'll leave it up in case you want to come back and visit it. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. I use Slack. I've used Slack for a really long time, so I'm comfortable with using it. Um, but yes, good luck to everyone. Um, I'm so I got challenged. I think it was by Leah. I'm gonna have a blog out because I'm gonna do the blog challenge. I have to finish kind of the software side because that's my strong suit. And my next thing I'm going to work on over this week is how to hook up all the software and put it into the cloud. So hopefully that blog will be kind of information useful to everyone and kind of recaps a lot of what we've already done in the scholarship. All right, have a great rest of your weekend, and hopefully, if you're continuing with the study jam, that your studies go well. See ya.